I think the difficulty in terms of your work, in terms of the Western Development Commission, is how do you get the balance between putting pressure, sufficient pressure on government to make the right decisions, to make the right policy decisions for the West, and at the same time you're funded by government. Now that's a challenge for many agencies and all of that. And obviously it's concerned us all that somebody like Paddy McGuinness would throw his hands in the air and say, I can't take this anymore. And we can see that there's nothing major has changed since then. There certainly has been no game changer. So we are concerned. So while you can present, a very optimistic picture, I suppose that's part of your job to do that, but there's things that we need to kind of dig a bit deeper on. And the first thing I want to ask you, I know your remit isn't in terms of applying for EU funding, but are you satisfied that we in the West are availing of all opportunities around EU funding as a Western Development Commission? And how concerned are you about the 10T projects being withdrawn? And is there a renewed application now made? And how much pressure are you putting on for a renewed application to be made? So that's one of the things. Now I want to ask you around the Atlantic Economic Corridor and the task force that was set up around that. How many times do you meet, or what's the relationship between the Atlantic Economic Corridor and yourselves? Has it made a difference? I suppose we're 2 years down the line, are we, from when it was set up? I know it was to be reviewed within 2 years as well. Has that been reviewed, and has it made a difference to the development in the West? Now we talked about broadband, and I think we need to be a little stronger in terms of all of the areas that are without broadband. And it's not even broadband, but they're huge areas that have no telecommunications. I mean, trying to make a phone call even to areas, and I'm not talking about the remote rural areas, I'm talking about areas within a half mile of Castlebar, that poor people have to go out and sit in their cars to try and get a signal. So that is the reality of it. So you talked about part of your remit as well in overseeing connectivity, and I do think connectivity is the key driver in all of the development in it. But we don't have, when we don't have basic connectivity, even like being able to make a mobile phone, sure, how could we expect a CEO or people to relocate to the West when you have whole areas like that? Now, I want to just ask you around as well, because education and the promotion of education would be part of your. Are you concerned about the GMIT and the slowness in implementing the report that was brought out last November on that? And are you even further concerned when you see recently the course has been closed down there as well, that there doesn't seem to be the will for the development of it? Knock Airport, I have to ask you, it's not just about the flights in and out, it's about us setting up an industrial zone there. And how important do you think it is that we have a decent fiscal incentive there to attract companies there, so that we have a proper development hub on it? And if you were to name, your one key infrastructure priority, what would it be? And just finally on the national planning framework, my concerns around that are that it seems to be population driven. And it also is where there are aspirations within it. There's no real commitment with timelines. And in particular saying that projects will be considered. So if you're doing a cost-benefit analysis on any project, and population is one of your main drivers, there are so many projects that I would imagine is a priority for yourselves, and certainly is a priority for me and for the Sinn Féin party. But we're concerned that the elements used within the cost-benefit analysis will almost predict the outcome of the decision. And for you as an organisation, as the Western Development Commission, how can you influence the elements that are used in the cost-benefit analysis so that it's not just population-driven? So I know there's a good bit in there, but I do welcome the opportunity to to discuss this with yourselves today. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.
Thanks very much, Senator. Mr. Brannigan, you might address some of those questions, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr.
Garvey.
I will, of course, Kieran. Sorry. I think in terms of the availing of EU funds, okay, on a broad basis, as I said, where the Western Development Commission are really sort of happy is that we have sort of really enhanced capability to offer EU funds in terms of Interreg and other such things, NPFs, in the region, and we're currently doing it to the tune of millions. And that's really helping the region, and we work with UDROS, NUIG, we work with private sector and everything in that. That's going really well, and we feel that that's a capacity that's needed because it's kind of like risk funding for ideas and concepts around development that people may not get easily anywhere else. In terms of the 10T project, that's a completely different EU thing. I fully accept your point there. The degree to which we are centrally involved in that is something that we have to look at more, because we would fully buy into the idea that we need to be on the core, not the comprehensive network in terms of what the 10T is. We believe that it's important for the infrastructure growth in the country, but also in the region. And I think that whilst we're doing a lot of great stuff in the EU, and whilst we have worked on 10T previously, there is definitely scope to look at that again and see, you know, what can we do to influence it. Ultimately, it will be, of course, the Department of Transport and the government that will be the main influencer on that.
Have you lobbied the government to do a resubmission on it?
Lobbying is not actually one of the things that we kind of do. We are an independent state agency, but as well, you know, we have to work within the whole remit. We have certainly informed. Okay. So we would certainly have put in what we feel is needed in terms of infrastructure. And you asked later on, what would you like for infrastructure, and I'll answer that. So we're very clear about what we believe is infrastructurally required in the region from talking to stakeholders. So again, we've got to put it through the proper channels and push as hard as we can that way. You mentioned the Atlantic Economic Corridor. You mentioned the number of meetings. So I am aware of the exactitude, so I may come back to you on this one. It's true to say there are regular meetings. So I know there's been one last week and one next week. We're on 3 subcommittees, or we were on 3, just 2 now, infrastructure and enterprise, as well as the steering committee. It meets regularly. There is a launch this Friday of a website related to the AEC, so there are things happening all the time. I think for the WDC, we absolutely embraced it when it came on board. For us, the major thing was it had the chambers involved, so we could really speak to business. We could get a lot of input. There's 70,000 odd employees there, and we remain totally committed to it. We've done submissions on their behalf. We've done a lot of stuff, and of course, it's under the aegis of our parent department. So we're working with them. Your question was, has it made a difference? I think it's quite early. It's only been going since the last one. It's really not for me to judge if it's made a difference. I think it's working in the right areas. I think a lot of good has come out of it. I think these things do take time. So, you know, there are tangibles that I've seen in terms of submissions, in terms of projects. There's meetings, there's infrastructure around the process. You mentioned connectivity as a basic necessity. As I answered the previous deputy, we have absolutely that feeling. That is something that we're getting not only as citizens but also from the business communities that we engage with. It's really necessary. We used to talk very much about people like Paul Cummins and all of that when we were talking to Telegale and all that. How do you produce in the west of Ireland and compete in international markets? And to him the thing was, well, I need connectivity. I need to be able to do in real time the business, not send it in post to India as it was. Now, this is quite a while ago. We need to continue to challenge that dynamic. We have coalesced hundreds of creative businesses, and almost all of them, even the artisanal ones, need connectivity to sell their products. Many of them need connectivity to create their products. So we work really hard with the relevant departments to do anything we can to push that forward as an economic imperative. Knock Airport, I've already said how much we work with them in terms of helping them even to historically on a flight level. You asked a specific question, Deputy, about the industrial zone and do we need a development hub. That is something that I was most aware of a number of years ago when we did an analysis with them on it. We were part of there was consultation done on that whole thing. Now, I remember at the time there was a need around some of the aviation businesses, some of the material science businesses. I really would have to go back to that, because I think your question, if I understand correctly, is there a special strategic planning zone requirement as such like, and I would really need to look at that again, because Knock Airport, I haven't had those discussions with them recently. If that analysis stands up, maybe the case. Then you mentioned, and before I hand over to my chair, well, two things. You mentioned the one key infrastructure priority. It's very hard, but I would say the roads are the big thing that have seemed to make the biggest difference to a wider economic hinterland. So we would feel, as per the submission in there, that to the NPF, that this is really important. And that comes on to, I think, a very interesting point you've made about some of the population-based criteria. I wasn't privy to all of that, so it's hard for me to talk about it. What I would say is, looking at the UK and how they used population-based economic models, that led, and they are realising this, is what I'm seeing and hearing, that has led to a disproportionate investment in the London area, which is coming back twofold to them now. So it's almost a bias that's built in. It's self-evident. What I would say very positively is the Western region is a coherent region of 826,000 people. That, in the Irish context, is a huge region. That deserves serious consideration, you know. But at the same time, I think you're right in saying that we do need to look at population-based models if they are driving decisions all in one way, because that can't realise the opportunities that we have in a geographic spread. And I think there's one remaining question.
Yeah, I might just come back to Senator Conway's opening question was around previous chair, and if somebody like Paddy McGuinness throws his hands up at it. And I very much recognise the challenges that Paddy faced. I was on the WDC board at that time, but I also you know, when you take on a position like this, the chair of a board like this, is you have to believe that you can make a difference, and you have to believe that the Commission can make a difference. And we do that by building on the successes where we have. And we've had a lot of successes, and it has had an impact. So when you look at the things like the creative sector, the RAP fund, the accelerators, the success of the WIF, I think if you stood in 2010 and you would look at the WIF fund right now, you would not have projected that the WIF fund would be that successful. So it has been indirectly. So I think the challenge with the WDC is, and there is that balance. I mean, I appreciate exactly what you say in terms of that balance of pressurising for you know, regional issues, while at the same time balancing with the central government in funding. It's very important that we don't become isolated from the centre, while at the same time have an ability to innovate locally and do things to create sectors which are really indigenous to the region and sustainable in the region over the longer term. And these take time. These take 5 to 10 years to develop sectors like that, like the creative sector. So we have identified a number of sectors in terms of growth for employment over the next number of years, and which we're looking at the moment, strategic plan. But I recognise the issue. It's not naivety. It's the fact that we do believe we have to make a difference. We have to look at where we have made a difference and how we can build on that. I'll just come back to your other question then in relation to education, and I suppose I have to say I have a WDC hat on today versus an education hat. So with my WDC hat, I would say, of course, we would share the concern in terms of education in the region. It's critically important right across the region, access to education. And the HEA report in their financial review of the Institutes of Technology have recognised that particularly regional campuses, and I'd say Donegal, Mayo as well, that these campuses provide access, and that is a rationale to have education provision in those regions. Access for people who otherwise may not have access to third level education. It's highlighted in the Rural Action Plan that education, and particularly the young male population, are leaving the region for education. So it's hugely important in retaining our younger people in the region that there's access to education. So I would share your concern there, and it's hugely important that the third level education provision in the region is maintained.
The other point maybe that, was there one more point that we missed there, Ian?
No, I think that's everything.
Oh, sorry, the other one I wanted to come back to you on, sorry, was I just noted on was in terms of the cost-benefit analysis and population. I would share that as well, and it's something I've spoken about previously in terms of balanced regional development, that, and it's written by many economists. I mean, John Fitzgerald has written about this a number of times, that, you know, these services cost more to provide into the regions. By using population-based models, you are excluding the whole social factor in terms of the wider and longer-term impact on the region. So, yes, I would share that concern, but I think it's important that we work in an integrated way to try and highlight these, and we do it through various ways in the WDC, through the policy team, to the input, and to the various submissions. So, you know, it's important that we keep doing that, I think.